I did want to touch on, Rex, something that Rory said. I believe it was after his round on Friday. So we talked about it on Wednesday. It was a little bit curious that Rory was not asked about any of the swirling drama as it relates to John Rahms and the Bryson DeChambeaus and LIV Golf in general, now that the Saudis have announced they're going to be pulling their funding at the end of the 2026 season. But when he talked about some of the players who have already said that they have no intention of coming back to the PGA Tour, and I'm talking about Thomas Pieters, I'm talking about Anirban Lahiri, among others, Rory said, quote, "If you want to be the most competitive golfer you can be, this is the place to be," talking about the PGA Tour. "And if you don't want to play here, I think that says something about you." That is a stone cold truth. And Rex, it is also a dagger.
You think he was talking with Thomas Pieters or one of those players that you mentioned? You think that's who he was talking to? Because that's not.
No, I don't think he was talking to them.
To.
No, talking to them specifically. I'm saying the overall narrative is some of the players who have come out over the past couple of days saying, "Yeah, I really don't have any intention to come back." That
quote is not directed at anyone other than Bryson DeChambeau.
Correct.
Let's be honest about this. That's the player this is directed to. And I'm working on a story. I'll finish it up tomorrow when I get to Philadelphia at the PGA Championship, because Bryson DeChambeau's own words are one of the, I guess I'll say one of the sort of lines in the sand that he's drawing if he comes back to the PGA Tour, only if, quote, they, players, want me back. Well, the answer to that,
you're going to be waiting a very long time if that's the case, Rex.
Don't ask a question you want to hear the answer to is essentially going to be the lead to my story, because trust me, no one really wants you back. You joined a lawsuit. You've had a lot to say about the PGA Tour over the years. And yes, I think there's a lot of people in Ponte Vedra Beach who have big offices that love the idea that Bryson would come back to the PGA Tour. I think it would make him returning would make it a better product. However, none of the players have much interest in him coming back. So I'm working on that. And I will say we touched on this on the Wednesday podcast, and there had been a bit of a spike in activity on social media. I know you're shocked by this. The idea being that somehow the PGA Tour had told Rory not to address this situation. Nothing could be further from the truth. First and foremost, no one is telling Rory McIlroy what to say or what not.
Can't tell me nothing, Rex, if you're Rory.
And so it was just kind of a confluence of sort of circumstances on Wednesday. There's a lot of reporters who were at the LIV event in Washington, D.C. or in Virginia. And so those would be the normal reporters who would ask. There were a lot of reporters who didn't come to this event because they're going next week to the PGA Championship. There's a reporter here that is kind of pulling double duty. I was outside waiting to do a stand-up interview that was going to run on Golf Central that night. So there really wasn't those reporters in the room that would ask that question. On Friday afternoon, myself and Ron Green Jr., who works for Global Golf Post, lives here in Charlotte, we did have a chance to talk to Rory. He had plenty to say. You're right. That quote is a mic drop. I will also say there were some other ones in there as well. I think the one that stood out to me was, if you can't make LIV Golf work, essentially, with the money that the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia had and poured into it, then you're not quite sure it's going to work at all. So he clearly had things to say.
Again, another truth bomb.
Facts. Absolute facts. And so all of those things, I think, add up to what he had been thinking all along. Again, I think he wanted to be asked about it. I think he had some thoughts and he needed to get it off his chest. I do think the interesting part of this is he opened one of those quotes saying that I don't know how many of those players want to come back. And that's probably true. I mean, we have done this experiment before. Of the 70 plus or however many players that we're going to have this conversation about, I don't know there's going to be more than 15 or 20 that A, have a desire to come back, and B, have some sort of avenue to make that happen. And then you start talking about, well, which ones do the PGA Tour want? Because I can tell you right now, there's probably going to be some the PGA Tour is going to be pretty ambivalent about. Just the idea being that, sure, if you want to qualify for the PGA Tour, there's all these avenues. Go have at it. But there's a very narrow list of guys who actually would have any status whatsoever.
Yeah, that was the point of what I was talking about with a Anirban Lahiri and a Thomas Pieters, who have at least said over the past week or so that they really don't have any intention of coming back to the PGA Tour. But no, it was quite pointed who Rory McIlroy was addressing. And there's really, you mentioned 10 or 15 to 20 players who could potentially be coming back to the PGA Tour. If you're the PGA Tour, you're circling two guys in particular. It's John Rahm, who, as he mentioned, is under contract for the next, quote, several years, with the potential to not seeing many ways out, barring some sort of force majeure with his contract. And, of course, Bryson DeChambeau, whose deal is up at the end of 2026, and who said once again last week in Virginia that if he's unwelcome on some tours, unwanted, he could potentially see himself playing on YouTube and just in the major championships. Bryson DeChambeau by the way, finished quite well in LIV Virginia, shooting 19 under par and finishing third. He also mentioned, Rex, that he'd had some shoulder issues in addition to some wrist issues, which had hampered him in the 2026 season. But Bryson DeChambeau, I would argue, more than Cam Young, more than Scotty Scheffler, more than Rory McIlroy trying to win back-to-back majors, in my opinion, Bryson DeChambeau is the headliner this coming week at the PGA Championship, just because of all that is swirling on how he's playing right now, as well as his competitive future. What do you think?
I think he's the newsmaker. I think he's the lightning rod. And don't get me wrong, like you and I have had this conversation before. You want a Bryson DeChambeau and a John Rahm and a Patrick Reed back on the PGA Tour because you want those storylines. You want the players who aren't exactly the darlings. You want the ones that don't wear the white hat all the time. And I'm not trying to make Bryson or John or anyone else a villain, but the fact of the matter is they were iconoclast. They were the type of personalities that like to sort of butt up against convention, butt up against what the traditions were of the game. Certainly, that's the definition of what Bryson DeChambeau has done over the course of his career. I would love to have him back. From a storytelling point of view, you and I carry notebooks and talk into microphones for a living. And for us, it's absolutely perfect. But I don't know that the PGA Tour is going to feel as if, oh, we have to get him back. I don't think that's the sentiment here at all. And when you start talking about leverage in negotiations, I can't imagine on any planet where someone would say, yes, John Rahm and Bryson DeChambeau have the leverage here, because there's a universe starting next year where they don't have anywhere to play. Now, the DP World Tour is the outlier here, and clearly John Rahm came to his agreement with the DP World Tour. But when it comes to the PGA Tour, maybe LIV Golf can't make it work. And so John Rahm's going to be relegated to playing the DP World Tour and the major championships. That doesn't sound like an existence he's interested in either.
Yeah, I talked about it with Eamon Lynch last week on Golf Today. If you're the PGA Tour and Bryson DeChambeau is talking in this way, in which he called potential penalties to return to the PGA Tour unfortunate considering what I could do for them, I'd call his bluff and see if he's actually serious about playing YouTube golf and just the major championships. He would be the first of any player to do so, and it's hard to imagine any scenario in which that would work out well for him.